Hello and welcome. In this episode, we are going to talk about what is going on in the Ukrainian war, how are the Ukrainian offensives progressing, and we are going to talk about further about the mobilization. And the big topic for today will be the political infighting that seems to move in a way that it's getting ugly. Putin has now announced that there's currently no more need for additional rocket attacks in the scale that we've seen in the past few days. He's likely addressing in this way the shortage of precision ammunition, which is in of course, if used in such an extent, will cause further problems for the Russians. At least according to the Ukrainian defense minister, they have right now only have 609 precision cruise missiles left from 1,844 to the beginning of the war. That doesn't include all those cruise missiles with comparable ranges that are not precision missiles. So they still have anti-ship missiles from the 60s that were originally designed to bring a nuclear warhead towards an aircraft carrier group, have a secondary land attack option, which then realistically have an accuracy of 500 meters or something like this. Might miss the target easily by 500 meters. It doesn't include the S-300 they are using as artillery rockets, more or less. It doesn't include stuff like this. But when it comes to the pure precision missiles that are meant to attack point targets, of those, according to the Ukrainians, there are only 609 left. And then, of course, to continue the attacks to the extent that was done in the last few days doesn't make much sense. The attacks are still continuing, though, but on a far lower scale, and a lot of it now is being done with the Shahed 136. They are increasingly and continuously being used within Ukraine, but mostly against targets behind the front lines, fairly far behind the front lines, like infrastructural targets and individual buildings. They seem to be completely unusable against troop concentrations, against specific positions on the front line, unlike, for instance, the Israeli Harop kamikaze drone, or loitering munition, which it is optically modeled after. The attacks are being done up to 1,000 kilometers behind the front line. So apparently they seem to have that range. And Russia has received at least 300, according to some reports, maybe several thousands. So we can see them continuously being used in the future, but mostly against targets with limited value, as they are not reacting to developments on the ground, and they won't stop Ukrainian offensives. They can bombard command centers that are identified buildings. They can bombard oil refineries, maybe storages. They might attack transport hubs, railway stations, etc., but they will not attack direct units on the front line, unlike the Harop. The In Belgorod now we have the report of something burning. We have the report of something burning. As of the moment of recording, I cannot confirm yet what it actually. There are two reports. Some saying that's the oil refinery that's supposedly there, maybe an oil storage. The other thing is that maybe it's something with the electricity grid, but as of now, I can't really confirm it. The only thing that seems to be sure is that there has been an attack on Belgorod, and it's being called an air attack. But whether it was actually done by Ukrainian planes that entered into Russian territory, I cannot confirm by now. It might as well just have been Tochka-U, which, if you want it this way, is attacking by air as well. When we come to the Eastern Front, the Ukrainians are continuing their advance attack and conquering additional towns here. They have now taken Ishane, Tabaivka, and Berestove, which are like here. They're still contested in this area. Russians report them attacking in this direction. The Russians are also reporting them attacking more or less along the line between Kislivka and here Pershotavne. Specifically, 2 days ago, the attacks have been towards Orlianka, and since in that direction, the attacks continue. According to Russian sources, the Ukrainians are still just at the river Serebets and are still trying to cross it. We have reports again and again in the last 2 weeks, more or less, that the Russians claim they defeated an attempt by the Ukrainians to cross it. Now, the Serebets is this river here, at least unless I'm completely wrong. It should be this river going down here. Then it goes fairly close. I think here it's going, and then here it goes into the Siversky Donetsk. So where they are crossing is not completely sure, because we have the confirmation that the Ukrainians are in Torska and Termy. So they are on the eastern side of the Serebetsk. It might be that it's along this line where where the Russians report to defeat Ukrainian attempts crossing this. We have further reports of Russian counterattacks in this area here. Now, the Ukrainian side now has confirmed that they have defeated an attack towards Termy, not on Termy itself, but towards it. And the whole information area coming from the Russians themselves and from the Ukrainians seem to show that there are ongoing attacks from Kremina into the direction between Termy and Toske, which is down here. More or less, they want to reach the Serebets here as well to push the Ukrainians back to allow for the defense of Kremina. The Russians themselves claim they still have full control over the roads between Kremina and Rubishne and Kremina and Svatove. So they claim to have full control here, and here they are actually throwing counterattacks into the Ukrainian attacks to push them back, to slow them. Further south, we have reports of attacks in the direction of Bakhmut, also nothing new. The furthest north I've heard was in the direction of Vesele in the last few days. Apart from that, further down, as usual, Bakhmutske is one of the points, and there's heavy fighting for Ivangrad and Optime. The Ivangrad seems to be captured. The Ukrainians, though, claim they are still defending it and eating attacks, so it's not completely sure, but there are Wagner mercenaries inside of it. Wagner itself, Prigozhin, says Optune is still contested, whereas the so-called People's Republic of Donetsk is claiming they have it under control. So we have attacks going on here. The Russians are also gaining a little ground in the direction of Belske, and they actually pushed back the Ukrainians in the direction of Optune in the last few days. So in the last 2 or 3 days. So the last 2 or 3 days, they actually gained some ground here and some ground here. So they are advancing in the direction, more or less in the Avdiivka crescent, if we want to call it this way. It's like a crescent around Avdiivka. They are advancing here, but no big breakthroughs as of now. The Ukrainian side is also reporting an attack towards Marinka. Supposedly hasn't achieved anything, gained any ground yet. And the Ukrainian general staff is now saying units in the Donbas, so it should be meant in this area, as far as I understand it, have received orders to stop their attacks, to stop permanently attacking, because of the high desertion rate, extremely low morals and morale, and because of units refusing the attack orders when they were given. And obviously, giving an order that is not obeyed is far worse than not giving the order itself, because if the soldiers get away with it once, they'll try it again. So ordering attacks that aren't done is a very bad idea. It's better to stop ordering the attacks in this regard. And so that is coming from the Ukrainian general staff. I repeat myself almost every video here. When it comes to news like this, that are not factual reports that the attacks have been on a certain town, where the Ukrainians say the Russians gained a foothold in Nevelske. That regard, we can be sure that they are there, because the Ukrainians say the Russians achieved something, then it's likely that the Russians actually achieved something. When it comes to things like the one I just said, that units have received orders not to attack anymore, that they have high desertion rate, all of this is far more difficult to prove, up to close to impossible to prove, especially as since that report there have been additional attacks in the Donbass. So we need to be careful here that we are take all of this with a grain of salt, as Ukraine is obviously active participant in a war and thus has an interest to shape the informational battlefield as well, not just the military battlefield on the ground. This regard, always have to take informations here with a grain of salt. I do this the whole time with the Russians, and generally the Ukrainians have been more reliable, but only more, not completely. And we'll see that again and again in those videos, and I'll continue pointing that. Further now, south, we have no reports at all of any attacks from both sides. At least I have not found any. And so obviously there's artillery fire, artillery duels on both sides, basically going on along the whole front line. But what we don't have is reports of either Russian attacks towards Vuhledar, towards Oriki, something of Yapole, or Ukrainian attacks further south in the recon missions or fixing missions in preparations for a potential offensive. There seems to be a fairly quiet front when ground combat last few days. In Kherson, we have reports about further attacks on the lines of communication, on command centers, on logistics and troop concentrations. The Ukrainians say they attacked pontoon bridges and ferries over the inlets, and the Dnieper is here, inlets is this here, and see here in called Darivka is a pontoon bridge because the Ukrainians destroyed that bridge, which is obviously essential to move troops that have crossed at Lvov and at Bakakovka to move them towards Kherson for the communication between those sides of the inlets. This is one of the essential points. So the Russians set up a pontoon bridge which regularly attacked by further, the Ukrainians, and here we're coming to one of those reports, further, the Ukrainians, take this now as an example. They say they attacked a troop concentration at Tokarivka and killed 150 Russian soldiers. Now, I usually don't mention those, but the number of 150 is extensive. Supposedly they killed them, but at the same time, we are inclined to ask, how do they, unless they have images, unless they have recorded radio calls that they have this and this many casualties. That's just any number the Ukrainians put out. They might not have killed a single one there. They might have killed 25. But if they take those 150 and fully assume then the casualty numbers Ukrainians are claiming, what are they now, 63, 65,000 soldiers killed, not including all those wounds. This is how those numbers materialize, and this is an example of why we shouldn't take those from without any criticism, why we shouldn't believe them as they are. Obviously, the Russians have already destroyed more HIMARS than Ukraine ever received. We see that the other side is no better. It is probably worse, but in this regard, generally, we are inclined to believe the Ukrainian side more if they tell us 100 Russian soldiers dead here without any proof. The occupation government from Kherson wants to evacuate civilians in large scale, and they claim it's to protect them from rocket attacks by the Ukrainians. Ukrainians themselves, the Ukrainian government obviously calls that deportation because they are moving children out and want to spread them within Russia. Right now they are claiming it's done vacation, but depending on how the frontline situation develops, it might obviously mean they will never return and thus being held in Russia, simulated. At least that's the fear from the Ukrainian government. We have reports that indicate that it's actually happening that way. For instance, officially said that from Russian local government said that from Luhansk, orphans arrived, spread among Russian families to be fostered there. And then again, we have basic Russification of those children will likely never home as Russians. North and the middle of the front here, we stay with Kherson. We have reports about Russian attacks on areas of Romka and Sukhoi. They have been unsuccessful in capturing Sukhoi. That much we know. And on the other side, we have reports of Ukrainians attacking along that line. It's usually being called, when we see the reports, Ishenka, Zadok, Betsov, Bezov, Bezodne, Bezvodne. More or less in this area, the Ukrainians are still attacking, but that's it for now. So the Russians seem to be, there are some reports of the Russians reports Chani, but I have not confirmation yet. I know as of no, anything I know as of now is that Duchani is still fully under Ukrainian control, but the reports that they were close to seems to be more or less false at this point. Further south, we don't have big reports about changing hands here. What we do have is Russian claims that Ukrainians are operating forces here. So supposedly we can expect an attack to Son fairly soon. That's it from the front line here. So generally the front is slowing down a little, but as we've seen in the past, that doesn't mean that suddenly the Ukrainians might find a gap to push through and collapse a part of the front line. Obviously, those attacks in the depth of the air can at some point also fail and cause horrific losses. And in theory, at least, the Russians might be able to well, but generally we can state that effects of the mobilization are still not sufficiently visible along the front line. Initiative is clearly the Ukrainian side. As the Crimea, we still have reports that the damages on the bridge are now increasingly causing bigger problems with supplies. Satellite pictures, we now have that over 1,000 trucks. We have a report here from radio, but a Russian version of it, symbol of it, that 1,000 trucks are now on the Russian side of the Kerch Bridge, and the ferries have a capacity. There are 4 ferries identified with a capacity of 90 trucks and 3. Yeah, I'm not completely sure whether that's actually per ferry or in total. Obviously, quite a difference in this. Some reports I said that means per ferry, but as of now I can't really confirm that yet. But that's the we have on the Crimean side of the Kerch Bridge. There are now 900 trucks waiting, so 1,000 in the area, 900 here. They also can't cross, but the Russians offer them to drive around here. They can either drive on their own through the land, or they can do it in a convoy that is traffic police to allow them. There are also reports the Russians say that they provide like food to the truckers, etc. But it's going to take quite a while longer, as the damage on the bridge has been extensive, and as of now the ferries have even stopped because of the weather. The reports right now are Tuesday there is no ferry traffic across this. Let's come now to the mobilization. Putin has told journalists that partial mobilization is going to end in roughly 2 weeks and finished, so in its full size. So far, nothing else is known. There are some rumors about a second wave. We have some reports of some local offices telling, supposedly, I think it was in Moscow, supposedly telling a reservist that he has to register, but he's not going to be drawn into the area right now. He's going to be drawn in second wave in January. That's at least what they said. We have to say, though, that in 2 weeks is November, and biannual draft was supposed to happen on October 1st, but was postponed until November. So if the mobilization supposedly ends at the beginning of November, draft can pull those 120,000 conscripts in that were called in this draft. And as all of this area is now legally, according to Russian understanding, obviously not but it's the Russians understand the whole area here, most likely including the whole provinces of Kherson, of Zaporizhia, and Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk, as they consider them to be Russian territory. Legally now, the Russians can actually use conscripts here, as Russian conscripts are not allowed to be sent into countries, can be used within their. The we when we stay with the mobilization, we have further reports about the first fallen mobilized. They are now already being sent back to Russia in coffins, and the criticism with the military is growing, especially also inside of the very military bloggers, as they say. It's obvious that the mobilized people have received the necessary training or the necessary equipment. And then we go to the big thing of one of the big topics of today's episode, that is the power struggle that seems to be escalating. It's fully going its way right now. Prigozhin, for instance, he's the founder of the Wagner mercenary group, is proclaiming that it was exclusively Wagner mercenaries that have taken part here. He obviously wants to emphasize his value, that he is the one still taking territory at the very moment, and to diminish the other participants in that war. Supposedly, DNR and LNR, both so-called republics, have been involved in the fighting there as well. There are some reports that they might have entered Ivangrad as well, but Prigozhin is claiming the whole success on himself. We have seen in the past Prigozhin to now having basically a press office presenting himself like the martial leader, handing out decorations, participating at funerals, etc., presenting himself as one of the big war leaders in this war. And this is now causing more and more troubles. Semyon Pegov, the runs Vargons, one of the big, huge Telegram channels in the pro-Russian sphere. He says the military has created a hit list with military bloggers that they want to take out because of they are discrediting the military. Take out is meant here in a way that they are supposed to be imprisoned through the applying of the laws of discrediting the military or some this area, as they have been reported recently, not executed. But this is now causing a big stir among the pro-Russian Telegram community, where they are all outraged about it because they are the ultranationalists. They are the ones supporting the war. Russian military wants to take them out, silence them. And there is report from inside Russia that actually Gerasimov has signed an order that is asking the governmental censor office for media, Roskomnadzor, he has ordered them to investigate Igor Girkin, that's Strelkov, the guy we mentioned in this situation report a couple of times already, Semyon Pegov, the guy from War Gonzo, many other prominent military bloggers, as well as the author from Grey Zone and Riba. Grey Zone is pro Wagner, and Riba we are mentioning here again and again as well. So supposedly all of them are now being threatened by the military with prosecution that should send them to jail. That supposedly the goal of this. And there are reports that several pro Wagner administrators of Telegram channels have already been arrested in the last couple of days. The military bloggers have to be understood here where they stand. They are ultra-national, but they usually support Prigozhin and Kadyrov, which are in opposition. What they lately said of the military itself, they blame everything that goes wrong to the military. They usually keep Putin out of the fire. They don't criticize him. When it came to the mobilization on this channel, I also said that Putin says he follows the recommendation of the army, clearly emphasizing it wasn't his idea to allow for the military to take the blame. All of this is now pointing that Putin is using the military blogger community to distance himself from anything that goes wrong, while he takes the credit of everything the military does. For instance, the big attacks on the Ukrainian infrastructure in the last few days. He announced them and he was celebrating that they finally strike back really hard against the Ukrainians and all of that. And so we see a kind of a power struggle because the military bloggers, Prigozhin and Kirov, attack the Russian military the whole time, and it now wants to defend itself and keep its stature and keep its stance to defend itself against all of this. Also, we have reports that Putin has actually had contact with the military bloggers several times where he invited them and talked to them, probably realized that the information from the military might not as the military bloggers were. All of this has to be seen in the power struggle because some of the military bloggers have already praised Prigozhin, even suggested he should become the Minister of Defense. And Prigozhin, at least that could be read into all of this, is finding prospect fairly interesting and attractive, and seems to now be supporting that hopes to end actually the seat. And this is obviously fighting each other is not going to help the Russian war effort and military feeling under attack, not just by the Ukrainians, but by the support of the war itself, and being left alone by Putin cannot be beneficial to the Russian war effort. Might not be dramatically bad, but it cannot be beneficial. We're going to finish all of this with a report now that the German IRST, supposedly that's the Defense Ministry of Ukraine, now saying they are already south of Ukraine air defense system now finally. At this point, I want to thank everyone that's supporting the channel. Without you, this channel would not be possible. Thank you so much for supporting it. And if you also want to help on this channel, allow me to spend the time for all of it. So by the means stated in the description, and I want to thank you very much for considering so. If you want to support the channel by non-financial, obviously do so as well. If you hit the like button, tell the Google algorithm this is a video that sharing that is being ranked up. Same with comments. Leave me a comment. What do you think? How will that power struggle actually turn into? Is Prigozhin, do you think he might have actually guts and the ability to take over from Shoigu, and will or be better when they take a cook from a criminal and somebody who's running a PMC, private military contractor group, mercenary group? He should actually enter in the control of the defense ministry. How would that be for Russian forces? Leave your comments about it. Have a discussion among each other. All of this is extremely helpful for the channel as well. Obviously, if you aren't a subscriber yet, I want to invite you to subscribe the channel. Hit the bell button so you don't miss future videos. Recommend the channel to your acquaintances to help keep growing. That's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back.